Hi, Year 13. Today's poem is The World by Rossetti. As always, if you were not in the lesson, just pause during those tasks that you need to pause for and have a go at completing yourself before then sort of taking notes on what I suggest. Diving straight into that then, looking at the starting activity. So this is to do with context, so it's just pausing here and making some notes. So High Anglican is a group in the Anglican Church that emphasises the Catholic tradition, especially in sacraments and rituals and obedience to church authority. The Garden of Eden is the biblical Garden of God, described in the book of Genesis and the book of Ezekiel. It is the setting for the story of Adam and Eve. So those two bits of information are really, really important because Rossetti was deeply religious. She attended an Anglican church with her mother and sister and believed completely in God and Christ. And that's going to be really, really important with the poem that we're going to have a little look at in this video. So hopefully you did pause there, and I will do what I usually do. I will read through the poem, and I've put the questions up there straight away to have a little think about as we go through the reading. So as always, don't neglect the title. What does the title suggest? What do you notice about the structure of the poem? What might this suggest? What is the significance of the nature imagery? And why use juxtaposition of night and day? So I'll read through it, and then if you pause and have a little go at answering those questions. So, the world. By day she woos me, soft, exceeding fair, but all night as the moon so changeth she, loathsome and foul with hideous leprosy, and subtle serpents gliding in her hair. By day she woos me to the outer air, ripe fruits, sweet flowers, and full satiety, but through the night a beast she grins at me, a very monster void of love and prayer. By day she stands a lie, by night she stands in all the naked horror of the truth, with pushing horns and clawed and clutching hands. Is this a friend indeed, that I should sell my soul to her, give her my life and youth, till my feet, cloven too, take hold on hell? So, as I said, if you pause there, if you were not in the lesson, so you can make some notes then on those questions so that you've got your own critical perspective before I provide you with some of my ideas. Alright, so I've got my notes here for you. So, thinking about the world, obviously you could say that we have a religious link here. It's this idea then of looking at sort of the idea of the world versus spirituality. We know that Rossetti was highly religious, and I did say that that would come into play with this poem. So that does link into obviously the meaning of the poem, because obviously she is looking at the world and particularly sort of worldly pleasures in this poem. I'll explain that as I go through it now. So you've got here the opening, so by day she woos me. Interesting use of the personal pronoun there, because it's ambiguous, it's female, and there's personification there. So it's personification really of the world. By day she woos me. And you've got immediately this juxtaposition that's set, because we're talking about by day, and then we have the contrast, but all night. So day and night contrasting with each other sets this mood, this idea of good versus evil, and innocence versus potentially sexual depravity, with this contrast of day and night. She woos me, and woos implies kind of a more gentle, romantic seduction. Soft, exceedingly fair, and there's the use here of the sibilance, for soft, and the fricative then for fair. Again, almost adding a softness to the way that you would pronounce that line. Exceeding fair, but all night as the moon so changeth she. Interesting use of the moon there, because symbolically it could be linked to supernatural. Additionally, the moon is ever changing, so you could think about the phases of the moon, and quite often in literature as well, women are sort of associated with the moon. The idea of women and how their bodies as well are in a cycle, thinking about sort of linking the moon as well to the idea of menstruation, that women are sort of linked in this sort of cycle, and the moon is kind of symbolic of that, this idea of changing throughout the month. So by but all night the moon so changeth she. So there's sort of comparing the moon and the world as well, and specifically the personification of the world. So this idea of changing is not necessarily a positive one there. You've got then this list of 3, this syndetic listing of loathsome, foul, and then we've got hideous, these adjectives, this tripling, and obviously there is a strong moral ideas being revealed in that. So strong adjectives reveal morality of the speaker. And leprosy as well, that was an interesting use of that, because leprosy, obviously linking to disease, could it potentially be a link to the idea of sexually transmitted diseases? And particularly in the Victorian era, syphilis would have been very widespread, and there could then be a link to that through the use of leprosy in the poem. And subtle serpents gliding in her hair. So we've got here the sibilance that's being used, potentially biblical reference here as well. Serpents, the Garden of Eden, the idea of temptation. Also though, this idea of serpents in her hair makes a reference to Medusa. So Medusa was originally one of the Gorgons. Now, depending on which interpretation you look at, in some interpretations she was cursed with the appearance of the snakes in her hair and to turn men into stone, because she was raped in the temple of Aphrodite, and Aphrodite took offence to this and then cursed her. In other interpretations, it was a gift. It was a way for her to protect herself so that she would never ever again be violated in that way by Aphrodite, giving her that gift. So you can sort of take that in your own personal interpretation of which way we want to view the idea of the Medusa figure here. By day she woos me. So again, we've got this anaphora here, this idea of seduction, this hidden seduction being repeated. By day she woos me to the outer air. Ripe fruits, sweet flowers. So we've got this nature imagery, and it has this idea of temptation. The ripe fruits, the sweet flowers, things that look appealing, but there's a sort of hidden agenda behind them, and full satiety. But through the night a beast she grins at me. So we've got this sort of stark contrast, this idea of fruits and flowers contrasting with this beast, and beast almost creating those connotations along with monster there of being quite predatory. Or you could say there's a biblical reference, because the devil is often referred to as the beast. She grins at me, and that verb grins almost suggesting something quite also predatory as well, something that's quite sort of intimidating. A very monster void of love and prayer. So this idea as well that there's no pretense here, it's far more open and direct and honest. And love and prayer obviously relating them to moral ideas again, particularly for Rossetti, who was so highly religious. By day she stands a lie, by night she stands. So we've got the caesura here, which breaks these two phrases up and shows again this division, this contrast, this juxtaposition between the two phrases and the two ideas of day and night. So by day she stands, and this is interesting here as well. There's this word play, and we've got the antenna classes for in terms of the technique here. So this word play. So it could be that she's telling a lie, and that's what stand means, and then stand up as in like physically standing up. So by day she stands a lie. So there's something that's not truthful here by day. She's using that sort of art of seduction. And then by night she stands in all the naked horror of the truth. And really sort of naked then is making reference to this idea of sexual depravity and potentially talking about sexual desire. So by night she stands in all the naked horror of the truth. And again you've got this juxtaposition of lie and truth. but that pretense has slipped away at night. There's no wooing, it's far more direct and honest in those desires. With pushing horns and clawed and clutching hands. Pushing, clawed, clutching suggests then something more forceful than the wooing, and unpleasant as well in terms of those verbs. Pushing, clawed and clutching are unpleasant. And you've got then the devilish references with clawed hands and the horns as well. Is this a friend indeed? So again, Caesura here to kind of add this pause to emphasise what's being asked there, and the irony, this idea of a friend, because actually it's leading to downfall, that friend that seemingly has your interests at heart and wants to bring you joy and happiness, but in fact it's not really a friend because it's leading to temptation. That I should sell my soul to her. So again, we've got this sibilance as well, maybe even reflecting back to the idea of the snakes and the serpent. So that it's almost bringing to mind again that sort of snake-like hissing that links back to the serpent and temptation. That I should sell my soul to her, give her my life and youth. Again, like I said, interesting use of her, almost subverting the idea of the devil into something female. Till my feet cloven to take hold on hell. So you've got the alliteration there and sort of drawing attention to that phrase, and the rhetorical question, the temptation of the speaker then. So the speaker does feel that temptation. You've got as well cloven in terms of the feet, the adjective being used to describe them. And that's a contextual link there as well. So traditional depiction of the devil in medieval artwork links to the cloven hooves. And if you remember, with Rossetti, she was part of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and they very much sort of looked at medieval artwork to sort of inspire them, and particularly the values as well, going back in art to the values of medieval art. So that's a significant link there in terms of context. So having a little look then overall at the message of the poem, it is this idea of earthly temptations, and in some respects the daytime is almost worse because it puts on this pretense, and it sort of leads you to temptation in a far more seductive and almost seemingly positive way, whereas the night is far more honest and blunt about the desires. So it's like the night reveals the true intentions, ironically, because that idea of darkness and light, darkness, there is more truth in what's being revealed. Now, it is a Petrarchan sonnet, there's octave and sestet, and it does use iambic pentameter, so it does follow the sonnet structure. So what, again, I would suggest here, it could potentially suggest the idea of the temptations and the idea of the passions of the flesh, and that idea of love then as well. So it could be reflecting that, it being a sonnet. However, I would urge you to look at the structure more in terms of the octave or octet and sestet, so that you can talk more clearly about the idea of the volta and what's being discussed and focused on in the octave or octet, and then how that shifts and changes into the sestet. And that sort of occurs if we look at it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it occurs around here that we have this break, and there's been a sort of description in the octave or octet about the idea of the duality of the world, the nature of it, but how overall it is just trying to seduce you with worldly temptations and pleasures. And that's where we have the volta then kind of switching to discuss that, to talk about the idea where, yes, it's divided, but actually there is sort of both the day and the night have the same aim, because the daytime is a lie, and that seduction that's there is kind of trying to kind of win you over. Whereas by night, it's sort of more stark and truthful, but there's a connection. Both day and night have the same aim. So hopefully that's really helped, and it all comes back, like I said, to this idea of earthly temptations, and bearing in mind how religious Rossetti was, it makes sense then that she's talking about these worldly temptations in this way, and how we've got those kind of biblical references as well. So as ever, we've got the themes. So for this particular poem, you've got religion. So there are key images throughout the poem linked to biblical imagery, particularly with regards to nature, the use of the fruit, for example. Sin, so the poem alludes to sinful thoughts and actions, concluding with reference to the consequence of sin, and the idea of bodily temptations, which sort of links into the next one. Temptation, so temptation of the flesh is referenced throughout the poem, particularly when night is focused on, particularly when it talks about, for example, the naked, standing naked in all its truth. So hopefully that helps. As always, I have the bibliography there as well to have a little look more closely at the links that I've used. But again, I would suggest that you have a look for your own notes as well, to gather more information on the poem. Obviously, the more notes you've got, the better your response will be in the exam. As always, any questions, just drop me a little email or a little message on our Google Classroom.